Here, ladies and gentlemen, we will have the session with Gurcharan Das, and in conversation with Gurcharan Das is Vasanthi Srinivasan. May I request both Gurcharan Das and Vasanthi Srinivasan to come on to the stage, please. Just to quickly introduce both the speaker as well as the moderator, Vasanthi Srinivasan is a professor of political science at the University of Hyderabad. She has a PhD in political science from Carleton University, Ottawa, and has taught at the College of Humanities, Ottawa. She has been a Commonwealth and New India Foundation scholar and also the author of Gandhi's Conscience Keeper, C. Rajgopalachari and Indian Politics, and Hindu Spirituality and Virtue Politics, and also Virtue and Human Ends, Political Ideas from Indian Classics. This was in 2021. She has been a visiting scholar at CASI, University of Pennsylvania, and SAS, Yale University, CPS, JNU, so on. And so Vasanthi Srinivasan would be moderating this session in conversation with Gurcharan Das. And very quickly to introduce Gurcharan Das, of course, is somebody that you all know, and that's why you are here. Gurcharan Das is an author, commentator, and thought leader. His publications include the trilogy on life's goals, India Unbound, The Difficulty of Being Good, and Kama, The Riddle of Desire. And India Grows at Night, A Fine Family, a novel, 3 plays, and a book of essays titled The Elephant Paradigm. Another Sort of Freedom, a memoir, is the book currently now in discussion at this session. That is his latest publication. He is the general editor for Penguin's multi-volume story of Indian business series. He studied philosophy at Harvard University and was CEO, Procter & Gamble, India. He writes a regular column for 6 Indian newspapers, including the Times of India. Welcome back, Gurcharan. Gurcharan Das was with HLF when his book Kama came out. And so welcome back to HLF. It's been a few years that we haven't been here. Thank you so much. And Vasanthi, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning. And as he just said, Gurcharan Das needs no introduction. So I'm not going to ramble on and on, except to say that there have been at least half a dozen people who have walked into the speaker's lounge to take pictures with him, and also said that they love the book on Mahabharata, The Difficulty of Being Good, which I suspect is also his favorite. It's certainly my favorite because I use it in my classes. And he's very excited to be here, I can see. And he said he wants to talk about one important question that's come up, which I also think is exciting. Given that he wrote The Difficulty of Being Good, how does he find it illustrated in his own life? Something that he lightly touches upon in the memoirs, but that might be a good way to start. Also because there are many phrases he uses in The Difficulty of Being Good. If you recall, it starts with Duryodhana's envy, which I thought was a strange way to start a book on the Mahabharata. And Yudhishthira is actually interspersed somewhere in between. And then it goes on to Draupadi's courage. Envy also tends to be a running theme in the memoirs. So let's start with what his response is to the difficulty of being good in his own life.
Thank you, Vasanthi. And yes, I'm delighted to be back in Hyderabad. And I just can't believe what's happened to this city. I mean, this didn't exist a few years ago. Anyway, Vasanthi asked me what was the difficulty of being good in my life. And the best way to talk about it is in terms of 2 things that happened to me at the age of 5. I'm in kindergarten in Lahore. And all the kids in the class have a pencil box. But the kid next to me, who sits next to me, he doesn't have a pencil box. And He's poor. He's Muslim. His name is Ayan. And also, I get irritated because he's always borrowing my pencils. So one day, at recess, when everybody goes out for lunch, I go. There's another kid who sits in front of me. He's the richest kid in class, and he has 2 pencil boxes, one shiny red, made in England. And he's the only kid who comes to school in a car. We all walk to school. So I go to the table of the rich kid, pick up one of his 2 pencil boxes, and put it on Ayan's desk. And then after recess, there's a scream, "Who stole my pencil box?" And he's, after all, the richest kid in class, so the teacher is very mindful, and she makes us all get up. We all get up, and everybody says, "No, we don't know what happened." And when it comes to Ayan's turn, he says, "Yes, there's a pencil box on my table, but I didn't take it." Then it comes my turn. And this is the time when I should have confessed what I did, but I am frozen. A temporary insanity comes over me, and Ayan is taken. Nobody believes Ayan, and Ayan is taken to the front of the class, and he's punished. And this incident has given me nightmares all my life. A few months later, as you remember, this happened in February of 1947. Few months later means August 1947. There's Azadi, and Lahore has gone to Pakistan, and we are Hindus, so we have to flee for our lives. And luckily we crossed the border intact, and we are waiting for the train at Jalandhar station. The trains are not running on time or anything at the time. And I see from the window, I'm 5 years old, I see my family is there, and I see from the window a handsome, tall policeman who's guarding the peace. And there's an incoming train. But just before the train, suddenly 2 Sikh boys, teenagers, come from behind, and they stab the Muslim policeman with their kirpans. There's red blood in my memory, and he falls down. And my mother shuts the window. And so I connect these 2 incidents because in my eyes, this was also an example of temporary insanity. But mine was a personal incident. This is a whole nation gone insane. Nation meaning Punjab. The state of Punjab has gone temporarily insane. People are killing strangers. These Sikh boys, by the way, that boy shouts, those Sikh boys shout Musalman. That's why they've killed him. And they were just strangers, and they just killed the man. And like this, people are killing their neighbors cheerfully in the name of religion. And what do you call this absurdity? Again, I said maybe it's temporary insanity at a level of peace. And after that, I've always had some suspicion of religion, and especially when religion enters the public space. So that's the two examples of temporary insanity, Vasanthi, and the difficulty of being good.
I think what runs through in the memoirs is your father's advice to you, which you say was that pregnant 3 words make a life. And your mother's slightly contrarian advice to you, which is get an education to make a living. And I think at some point you say, should it have to be an either or, which is a very rhetorical question throughout. But you did seem to manage, it appears, to reconcile the two. So a lot of students, I'm sure, and young people here often wonder about whether their education should be about their ability to make a living or to make a life, and if so, how one can reconcile. So maybe from your experience, if you can give some advice on that. Although I personally think that you succeeded in making a living, but I'm not so fully satisfied with your response that you also succeeded in making a life. So can you please throw some light on that?
Do you mind if I get up?
Yeah, go ahead, get up.
Okay,
You can dance too if you want.
I just find it easier to think and talk when I'm standing rather than sitting. Anyway, again, we go back to the same class in kindergarten in Lahore. And now, that first incident of the pencil box was in March. And now it is April. The school has come to an end. And I'm running home with a report card. I'm running home with a report card, and my mother's waiting at the door, and she sees me and she asks, "Did you stand first?" And my father is nearby. In fact, just where Vasanthi is, only he's standing. And he tells her that was the wrong question. You should be asking him, what does he like about school? Does he like to draw? Does he like to hear stories? Does he like poems? What does he like? Who are his friends? And so on. And my father, so this is what Vasanthi is talking about as the two influences in my life. My mother, with her Punjabi middle class insecurities, was keen that I have to grow up to make a living. And my father was more relaxed. He's an engineer, but he's also a mystic. And he spends 2 to 3 hours a day in meditation. So my father is saying to make a life. He never told me what he meant about make a life, but it's a theme. She's absolutely right, because it becomes a recurring theme in my life. And I'll jump now to when I'm 17. I have got a scholarship to go to Harvard. I mean, it was unbelievable in those days, but I had unbelievable luck sometimes. And so there I am. It's Palam Airport in Delhi, and the Air India flight is about to take off. And my mother has tears in her eyes, and she's saying to me, "Now remember, you have to come home and you have to get a job. So study something useful and study hard, you know." And my father is more relaxed. And he says to me, as he's leading me to the gate, he says, yeah, but enjoy Harvard. Study something that you really enjoy. So he has given me a different sort of perspective. Anyway, I arrive at Harvard, and the course catalog is a treasure chest. And I promptly forget my mother's advice. And what do I study over the next 2 years? It's a 4-year program. For the next 2.5 years, I study Greek tragedy, Russian novel, history of capitalism, Bauhaus architecture, Renaissance painting, Chinese ceramics, and even Sanskrit love poetry. And when my mother hears that I'm studying Sanskrit at Harvard, she says, "Hi, hi, mera munda." A dead language, only the dead will now give him a job. And my father has to reassure her that not to worry. What he's doing at Harvard is making a life through books. She doesn't fully understand it, but this is the, so taking these different courses and studying studying so many different things. Even Harvard got worried, actually. In the junior year, I'm called by the dean, and the dean says, "Now, you've got a major in something, and then you have to write a thesis if you want an honors degree. And so what will it be? What do you want to major in?" And I say, "Philosophy." He says, "Why philosophy?" I say, "I want to be happy. And I think philosophy may show me the way." He said, that's a good answer. And that's a good reason to study philosophy. But I'd also taken a courses on Plato, Aristotle in the meantime. And so I was reasonably... Anyway, I graduate in philosophy from Harvard. I get a scholarship to go to Oxford to do a DPhil, a PhD. And I'm back home in Chandigarh. And one day, my father has a job with the Punjab government. And one day I asked myself, do I really want to spend the rest of my life at that stratosphere of abstract thought? No. I want a life of action. So I don't have a clue what that life of action is going to be, but quietly I write to Oxford to say I'm not coming.
Can I ask you something on that?
Yeah.
So you can continue on the same lines. You say that somehow education was soulless in school, and you learned how to play to win. And then you went to Harvard, and you thought that philosophy was becoming very boring. That is a professional philosophy, right? But you still find a way to extract something from Harvard that then will feed into your success. Can you tell us what that was? Was it just the love for ideas?
Well, I mean, Harvard was a liberation of the spirit. It's like a religious experience almost, because it completely, I mean, if my father had to define what he meant by making a living, this was the example of making a life. In other words, making a life through books is a liberating experience. And, you know, it's after school, this was the first occasion where this occurred. And so I know this is high-tech city we are in, and technology is the way everybody is thinking about their lives. And obviously, India has done well in software. We have created a digital revolution, and we should all be proud of these guys who have really put us on the map. And that's why I've always, Chandrababu Naidu has been one of my heroes, who created the conditions for something like this here. But I tell you that in India, we really still think of liberal education as people who can't do math and science. And they are sort of kind of second-rate people. But what Harvard made me realize was the opposite. And I could never write the books that I write if it weren't for what I studied as an undergraduate. And even as when I was CEO of Procter & Gamble, the sense of the ambiguity of life, the sense that life was not black and white, which you also observed in the difficulty of being good, that dealing with human beings is ultimately what business is all about. You know, businessmen, I was telling Vasanthi that now that I have lived 25 years as a writer and then before that 25 years as a business person, I find business people actually are better human beings. Why? Because business people understand interdependence. That a writer doesn't need anyone, sits in his bubble and writes away as though the world did not exist. But a business person has customers, and you have to be good to your customers, you have to create good products. Even Ratan Tata has to bow down to his customer. The business person has suppliers. Now you have to be fair to your suppliers. The tendency is you try to squeeze the supplier too hard. If you do that, you'll get hurt because the component you'll get from the supplier will be substandard. Business person has employees, and you have to be respectful and fair to your employees. And so the fact of the matter is that understanding business, a business person instinctively knows that the transaction will go through only if both the buyer and the seller are satisfied with the price. And so therefore, I feel that when I was a business person, I was more mindful of others and their needs. And now, I don't need anyone. And that's the difference. Anyway, I know that's not where you were going.
No. I'm happy with where you're going, but I just want to then say you did answer that question. It appears to me that Harvard gave you that imaginative flair, which made you such a unique person even in all those corporate positions. You had the ideas of how to push the boundaries, but you also learned then, and I think that's a very damaging criticism you make also of intellectuals, that they become snobs, they are pretentious, they lie, they're inauthentic, etc., etc. So the cooperative spirit you got from the business people, it appears, and then you got the imagination from the academy, and which is something that young people here might take away from this conversation.
It's a good point. That's a good point. You know, I had secretly hoped that when I switched my life from a business life to a writer's life, I might actually become a better human being. That did not happen. I still, the other day, I was at the Khan Market. There's a store called Bari and Sons. I know the owner, and so I go to him. I see that my book is not in the window, so I'm outraged. I go to Bari and I say, look, my book's not in the window. So he places it in the window. But I say, I want it to be in the front, not in the back. So you see that vanity and all the things, and so that's why.
So I think that you hit the nail upon the head. So two things which you seem to be wrestling with through the memoirs. One, envy, which I think is a 21st century middle class problem anyway. And related to it is vanity. And I wonder, because even towards the end you say, there are three archetypes there in the book. One is, I'll just talk about Kamble. you should tell us about Kamble, because you seem to think that Kamble had overcome both envy and vanity, whereas these two became the bugbears for you. And I don't know where you stand on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, towards
Yeah.
the end.
You know, the book is called Another Sort of. Do we have a copy of the book? I forgot to bring mine.
I have it on the screen.
Oh, you have it? I should have, anyway. Somebody's got it. Can you just bring it? I mean, thanks. Thanks a lot. Okay. All right. Thanks a lot. I'm not going to run away with it. And so it's another sort of freedom. And I'm going to talk about Kamble in the context of why. And what is that other sort of freedom? Now, Vasanthi has put it in her own words as being free of envy, etc. But the dedication to the book, the book is dedicated, and I'll just read it out to you. Yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. It's dedicated to the happy few who don't take themselves too seriously. In other words, what I've learned through life is, and this is really goes back to the story, Vasanthi, that we were talking about, of how I got my name. My name used to be Ashok Kumar. But my grandmother suspected that my mother, her daughter-in-law, had given me that name because she thought my mother was secretly in love with the Bollywood actor named Ashok Kumar. So this wasn't right. So she took me to her guru, placed me at his feet, and told the guru, Guruji enu na deo, give this boy a name. And the guru sees me at his feet and he says, well, let's call him Gurcharan Das. And so overnight, at the age of 3, I am transformed from the Ashok Kumar, the Prince of Happiness, to the humble servant of the feet of the Guru, Gurcharan Das. And some years later, I asked the Guru, why did you give me that name? Ashok Kumar was such a good name, you know. I mean, Prince of Happiness, what more? And so he says, you know, humility is a good thing, and it's always good to remember that. And this should remind you of it. And then he gave the very best definition of humility that I've ever heard. And that became the mantra of this book as well. He said, humility is to take your work seriously, but not yourself seriously. So that is the running theme of the book, plus the fact, we were talking earlier about a Sanskrit word. By the way, the freedom that I'm talking about is moksha. And moksha, this becomes the quartet. The trilogy now becomes the quartet. But I've gone to the original meaning of moksha. And if you read the Monia Williams dictionary, he gives 25 examples of moksha from classical literature. And in all those examples, it just means to be free. So he gives an example of someone who has paid his debt. Mukti ho gayi. Then he gives an example of a man who comes out of jail. He's free. Then he gives example of an oyster that comes out of a shell. It's become free. So it has no spiritual connotations until quite later. The Artha Dharma Kama was at least 500 years before moksha became a common. Now, then of course, after Shankara, moksha cannibalized all the other three, and it became the big spiritual meaning that we know. But so I have given a secular, non-transcendental, not purely organic, purely natural, all natural meaning of moksha. Nothing supernatural about it. And so the other word that we were talking about, which is a key word in this book, is laghima. Laghima means lightness in Sanskrit. From laghu, laghava, that's the root. And even Patanjali mentions it in the Yoga Sutra as one of the siddhis, which the benefits also from yoga. And that also, if you live in this way, and I'm coming to Kamble. Do we have that? Are we running out of time?
We have time.
We have time. Okay. So the idea of not taking yourself seriously is ultimately the route to be able to live lightly. And the third word that is a thematic key word in the book is Leela. That is to say, Leela is divine play. Ram Leela, which we know so well about now, Krishna Leela, Krishna is dancing with 1,000 gopis for one Brahma night, which is 8.2 billion years. Can you believe it? So, if the idea being that if the gods can have fun creating the world, it's a lesson to us to live in that spirit. And so that's done. Now, why Kamble is important is because whereas I may have made my life in my way, combining a life of a business life and a writer's life and so on, or combining, breaking away from my mother's idea to only make a living. And I have to also tell you how I started working. I started, why after Harvard? What did I do? And I have to tell you that story because, so when I decided that day that I didn't want to live at that academic, the kind of academic life, my mother's worst nightmare came true because she had a grown-up son, unemployed, at home, which in Punjabi we call Vela. Vela Munda. Idle. And we had a nosy neighbor in Chandigarh. And she used to come and visit my mother for, in the morning for coffee or something. And she would always say, Thoda munda ki kar reha hai? What's your son doing? And my mother would get embarrassed and didn't know what to answer. So I saw my mother's embarrassment and I promptly, I said I must do something about it now. So I started looking at wanted ads in the paper. In a few days I found a company that made Vicks Vapora. And I applied for the job of a trainee. I didn't know what a trainee was, but I applied and I was interviewed, and the interviewer asked me, what's your objective in life? And I said, happiness. And he said, wrong answer. He said, I meant, do you want to do production, marketing, finance? That was the question he was asking me by the objective that I had. And so I said, this interview is not going too well. But just then, a beautiful, stunning woman walked in. And bringing tea and coffee. And my attention got totally diverted. And so I watched her as she put tea and coffee, biscuits on the table for us. She might have been his secretary. And then the interviewer drew my attention away, and he says, so you mentioned happiness. What will give you happiness? And I said, a beautiful woman. And he said, he didn't quite know what to answer. But I realized this interview was not going too well. Anyway, in the end, I don't know why, but I got the job. And I got the job. I guess they got impressed with the Harvard degree or something, what we mean. But that's how I entered the business world. And so the company Vicks VapoRub, one year there was a flu. By now I had started, I liked the rough and tumble, even though it was difficult because I was transported from the ivy-covered halls of Harvard to the dusty bazaars of India, you know, selling Vicks, ek dozen ek free to the chemist shops. But the reality is there was this flu. This was during the days of the license Raj. And we sold a hell of a lot of Vicks. And we were kind of heroes that year in the eyes of our headquarters. It was an American multinational company. And we were celebrating, and the lawyer brought me a summons from the government. It said that we had broken the law, and they wanted me to come to explain why we had broken. The law we had broken was the license given to the company to produce so many tons of Vicks VapoRub, and we had exceeded it by almost 30%. So that's a real, and you know, there was a 3-year jail sentence, believe it or not, a 3-year jail sentence to break the license, the law, violate the law. So I go to Delhi, and I'm sitting, waiting. First of all, the joint secretary who has sent the summons, he keeps us waiting for 2.5 hours, cooling our heels, us meaning the 2 lawyers with me. And so then we are summoned into his office. We are taken to his office, and he keeps reading the newspaper. He was reading the daily paper, and we are sitting there waiting for him to notice us. And he keeps reading the paper, and finally he stops, puts the paper down, and he says, "Kya?" And I said, "Sir, आपका ये क्या? क्योंकि आपने बुलाया है हमें." And he says, no, I have not read your file. Tell me, what is it you want? I said, I don't want anything. You have asked us. You sent us the summons. So he says, he takes the paper from my hand, and he says, oh, you've broken the law. And I then explained to him that there was a flu in the country, and we sold more Vicks VapoRub, and we thought we were producing for the country. We were benefiting the people. Millions of children have been helped, and adults, during this epidemic. But he says, but you've broken the law. And I said, yes. So he says, you admit that you have broken the law. I said, yes. And then he says, all you chaps in the private sector are all crooks, and I want to make an example. of your company to give an example to others that in our country we're not, even though you may be a multinational, but you're not allowed to break the law. And I get really scared at this point. And then he says, Jao, get out of my office. And so as I'm going out,
Gurcharan, you have 1 minute
1 minute left.
and a punchline from that story, and then we open up for questions.
Okay. Vasanthi says 1 minute. I'll take only 1 minute. And then I don't know what happens. At the door, I turn around.
How you threatened him?
No, I turned around and I said to him, Sir, we are a multinational company. It's not every day that an executive of a multinational goes to jail. So it'll be in the newspapers. It'll appear in the New York Times, Washington Post, London Times, Indian papers. And the story will be how a company produced for the country something which was useful to the people during an epidemic, and you sent the person from the company to jail. How do you think our country will look to the world? How do you think our Prime Minister will look to the world that she has laws of this kind that punish people for doing good? Difficulty of being good. And so he says, are you threatening me? That's what Vasanthi just reminded me. He says, are you threatening me? I said, no. The news is going to get out. I don't have to leak it out. And then he says, Jao. And when we come out of his office, the lawyers get very upset with me. They said, you were threatening him when you should have fallen on his feet and begged for mercy. Anyway, finally the government dropped the inquiry. We have now run out of time. But anyway, that's the story.
Thank you so much.
You all don't know what it was like to live during the license Raj. That's what one of the things I wanted to tell you, that we sacrificed 2 generations of our country, of our young people to the license Raj, the first 40 years. And we only got our freedom, real freedom, economic freedom in 1991, not in 1947.
Thank you so much. You'll all agree with me that we've got some fascinating glimpses into the memoirs, which you're all encouraged to buy and get signed and read. But now we are open to taking some questions, so please go ahead. Yeah.
Hello, sir. My name is Avinash. Huge fan of your work since India Unbound Days, which came out when I was pursuing my master's in economics. Can you hear me? Yeah. So, huge fan of your work since India Unbound Days, which came out when I was pursuing my master's in economics at the Delhi School of Economics. And that work, in some ways, influenced a lot of my career choices. So, with that being said, 2 questions for you. And I would be a bit greedy because I got the mic first. So first one is a bit practical. In this book, through the journey that you paint, you talk about the quest to get free to do something else throughout your corporate life. And reading through it, I got the sense that it was in moments when the so-called life of action was not that active in your job, when this quest became stronger. So the question for many in the midlife like me, is it that when our professional lives are not that hectic, not that action-oriented, not that packed, that is when this question about that quest keeps coming up.
Yeah.
That is my first one. And do you want me to wait for the next one, or should I give it to you?
No, I think it's better you raise both of them because there are lots of hands going
You
up.
raised a very good
And
first
please be
question.
brief.
So let me answer that.
Gurcharan and Gurcharan, no, we can't do that.
We
Let's please take the questions.
I
because
can't
you have
answer.
No, you will answer, but there's 7 minutes that we have.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
let him ask the second question.
Second question.
But I'll forget the first one, yeah.
All right, go ahead. All right,
So let me answer your first question, and then if I'll answer your second question. So it's a very good question, and it really goes back to this whole business of what my father and mother were talking about between making a living and making a life. Now, you know, the reality is that all of us basically stumble through life. My father knew that we are not all like Mozart, who at the age of 3 knew that he was a musical genius and he'd make a life in music. Most of us stumble through life. And we follow my mother's advice, we work hard, we get good marks, go into good school, go to good college, then we enter a good company, and then we start climbing ladders, we get married, we get a big house, a bigger car, children, and we repeat the same thing with our children. And then you're absolutely right, in our 40s, we ask ourselves, is this what life was all about? I think that's the question that you have asked, and it's something that we all ask. And that is one of the themes of this book. And why at that time I asked that question, and what triggered that question, and is part of the story of this book. So let me leave it at that, because she's telling me the time is short and there are other people also who have raised their
Yeah.
question.
Will, if you don't mind, can you chat with him after the session, because there are many hands going up. Yes, please, the gentleman here in the second row.
Before the emergency, I'm not 100% sure, but I think it was in the 70s. And I had become a marketing director of the company by then. That's why I had to go to Delhi. My boss was away at the time.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So what are your 3 mantras of life? Now looking back, you would suggest us 3 mantras of life.
Yeah. No, that was basically, the idea is not to take your work seriously. To take your work seriously, but not yourself seriously. And it's illustrated by living lightly. Living lightly, not like a feather, but like a bird who has agency. And to live with that lightness and being inspired by the Leela of the gods. After all, they're telling us, if they can create the world out of play, Shiva dances and is creating the universe. And so we too can do it. And I guess if there's time, I can tell you someone else who did it, which was Kamble. But that may take two.
We must hear about Kamble. Please go.
Okay, so the person in my life who reflected this spirit of Laghima, of this whole idea of Leela and Moksha, was the temporary security guard who came to work for our company. He was from Akola district. He did not know English, and he was metric pass. And he is the one, he was such a dehati that our company was called Procter and Gamble. He would say Procter and Gamble. His name was Kamble. But we knew immediately that this guy was somebody very special, because he was like a child. You know, he was fascinated by everything he found he found the coffee making machine the first day. And he's making coffee, he learns to make it, and then he's serving coffee to others. Next day, he finds the telex machine. Those days we sent telexes to each other. And he doesn't know English, but he then starts taking English lessons so he can use the telex machine. And so just like this, he showed the kind of spirit that a child expresses. You know, when it's raining and all the adults, and there's a puddle in the road, all the adults carefully with their umbrellas warning, they go around the puddle. What does child do? Kamle jumps into the puddle to see how it feels like. So this is what this guy was. But you know, it's a longish story, and I don't want to take too much time, which I've told. But I just want to tell you that he, in this spirit, got promoted, and then he got promoted, and every section where he worked, he energized it with his sense of self-forgetting. Self-forgetting means the idea of not taking yourself too seriously and not caring who gets the credit for what is achieved. And so it's a bit like Nishkam Karma in that sense. But since there's so little time, I could love to tell you more stories about him, but he ended up as a director of the company. Assistant security guard ends up. It's a tribute to him and tribute to the company, who recognized a person who didn't speak English but yet learned it and was learning everything on the fly, and he had understood what the company was all about and made a difference.
Yeah.
But I shall leave you at that.
Yeah, no. Another way of putting it, and you put it so well in the book, is he wanted to learn everything. He wanted to excel at the work, but he never wanted credit for it, which I think is the essence of self-forgetting.
Yeah.
And I think that's what dogs a lot of us. We want credit for what we do.
Yeah.
And I think that gets us into this being
You know,
unfree
Vasanthi,
that you talk
there's
about.
another, I was just going to tell you, this notion of self-forgetting is, they asked Tendulkar, when he was, his last double century, fantastic double century that he did before he retired, and the reporter said, well, how did it feel like when you were approaching your double century? And he said, I wasn't even there. The ball by then had become so big, and the bat had become so big that the bat was just hitting the ball. That's the idea of a certain sort of freedom that this book is about. That you don't, it's like Kamble, you don't care who gets the credit, but you get so absorbed in what you're doing that it's a form of happiness, of freedom, etc.
Thank you so much for this session. It has been so wonderful. My name is Sandhya, and just 2-month-old author of a book called Shifting Sands of Saudi. So I lived in Saudi Arabia, where again freedom was at a price that we paid for. So my question to you is, after finishing this book, did you experience some kind of a freedom or moksha when you wrote it? Because I did when I wrote the book.
No, it was really the whole idea, when you have to write a memoir or an autobiography. By the way, there's a difference between a memoir and autobiography. If you're writing a memoir, what you're doing is you're selecting incidents and connecting the dots, and you're remembering. And let me tell you a secret. I suggest you all write a memoir, because a memoir requires you to remember your life and then narrate it. And I have discovered that reliving your life, that remembering, is a superior experience to relive your life than live it. And why? Because you're playing God. You decide what happens in your life. You select those incidents that are making this point about madam, you asked this question. You decide, and the notion, I finally said, what is it that's connecting all the dots? And it was this another sort of freedom, whether it was you have to see the incidents in my life. I mean, I was just reminded that my mother had a diary. That's why I can remember a lot of my childhood. And the first reference to the diary is on page 17. And it is, she says, "This is a restless baby." A year later, she's saying, "He's a difficult child." Another year later, she's saying, "He's a troublemaker." So you see a certain pattern that those dots eventually created, and I could just go on and on.
You said that how the world will look at India. How do you think in our current times the world is looking at India now?
Now that's the subject of my next book. It's called The Dilemma. I was telling Vasanthi about it. It's called The Dilemma of the Indian Liberal. I'm a classical liberal, and the classical liberal not only believes that the market should decide what is produced in the country and not a bureaucrat, and how much is produced and not a bureaucrat. So in the same way, I value other freedoms, economic freedom, but other freedoms. And I'm sorry to say that the world is not looking too well at us today. We are a proud democracy. The irony is that we used to be a proud democracy with a poor economy. For 40 years, we were one of the worstly performing economies. Only after 91, our economy picked up. Ironically, today, we have a dynamic economy. Since 91, we have grown at almost 7% a year. That is amazing for a democracy to do over 30 years. And this year, we are the fastest growing in the world. But just when we have a great economy, our democracy is in trouble. So, I mean, it's a subject for another book and another talk.
Yeah. My question is, what would you like to be written on your tombstone?
Sorry?
What would you like to be written on your tombstone?
That's always a good thing to do.
The tombstone one you should do at lunch.
Okay.
It's an inauspicious way to end a talk.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Let me just add though, that in the first 40 years, if you study the work of the poverty analysts, it made, despite the fact that Indira Gandhi's slogan was Garibi Hatao, and Nehru genuinely wanted to help the poor, we did very little for the poor. The number of people who crossed the poverty line was very small. All the poverty reduction has come after 91.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And I have a couple of announcements. Please bear with me for a minute or so. Number one is Gurcharan Das's book is available at the book point, which is on this side. You can grab a copy and get his signature. Announcement number two is that, when Gurcharan was talking about taking oneself lightly, I was reminded of Robert Stevenson's line, which said that birds can fly only because they take themselves lightly. Birds can fly only because they take themselves lightly.